Okay, so yeah, as I said, welcome. Today's session, we're going to be having a look at CSU's lecture capture solution, Panopto, and how it's used by quite a few educators for resource creation, not just lecture capture. So it is being recorded, and I will provide the form for people to drop their names into and feedback if they so desire. But today's session, we're going to be having a look, just unpacking the difference between the use of the term CSU Replay and Panopto itself. We'll look at a few exemplars of how the product's being used at the moment, and that is changing quite a lot in the last 6 to 12 months, particularly because of several things. If we look at the advent of Zoom, for example, and how comfortable a lot of us are getting using Zoom for not just live meetings, but obviously creating resources and provisioning them quickly. People using school-based YouTube accounts or individual YouTube accounts, and the affordances that we get with using a tool like Panopto over those platforms. We'll be looking at adding Panopto to your subjects if you need to, but I will point out that that process has become a lot more streamlined in the last 6 months because it's part of the default subject template for every I2 site. So we'll have a look at that. I like to basically walk through the back end of Panopto itself to get people familiar with that, because it's very important that you understand the difference between what Panopto looks like in your individual session by session subject sites and the limitations that that has versus using the back end of Panopto in your own individual folders. Because if you use those folders, then the files won't be deleted. There's no threat of them being purged or removed. And but you need to be aware of how to access that and, think about the pros and cons of doing so. And we'll look obviously at how you embed those resources or link to them within subject sites, etc. Time permitting, we'll have a look at how people use assessment items with video uploads, etc. And as always, if you've got questions, etc. along the way, please drop them into the chat, pull me up, etc. I'm happy to talk through these sessions and address your individual needs as they crop up. Fairly small group today, which is great. As I said, please feel free to pipe in if you've got something to add. So look, with that in mind, let's get into things. First point I want to raise is about terminology. CSU Replay is the term that the institution gives to our lecture capture solution at any given time. So in the past, we've used another platform, Echo 360, for example, to capture lectures. And when that tool was retired and replaced with Panopto, it's still all referred to in our subject sites and in a lot of the documentation as CSU Replay. But basically, it's the same thing. If you see Panopto and CSU Replay, they are talking about the same tool. This is the name of the software itself. This is just CSU's branding for whatever lecture capture tool we have in place. So don't be confused, I guess, by me jumping between those two terms at times. They're talking about exactly the same thing. First and foremost, all teaching staff are able to access the Panopto CSU Replay tool from their subject sites via a tool link in the navigation bar. It's by default, it is hidden and down the bottom of your nav bars in subject sites. If I can pull up a few of those, we'll have a look. So for example, if I have a look at this one, hang on. Why do these things have to be so long? So by default, it'll appear right down the bottom unless you move it up and place it somewhere else. So I can see that this academic, for example, has put CSU Replay all the way up here under subject community, and it's still hidden. And we'll talk about why they might have done that in a bit. But it is provisioned to all subject sites now. When we talk about Replay and as a tool for creating resources for you as teachers, there are three questions that I generally ask teachers to think about. First one being, where do you want your video to go? How long do you want it to be there? And what do you want it to look like? As in, is it just going to be a link that people click on? Is it going to be an embedded player as such, a window that people can click on, or something else again? Is it meant to be part of another type of interactive? And these are important because depending on your answers to these questions, I would be straight away recommending different tools for different purposes. Arguably, this is the most important one. How long? By default, when CSU Replay is provisioned to a subject site, that means it's obeying the same rules in terms of longevity that our subject sites do. After 18 months, 2 years, etc., it will be archived and everything in that site will go. Can be quite difficult to retrieve archived content, but particularly with the video side. So when we talk about purging, video purges, etc., every year there is a staff member in DIT who will go through all those subject sites which have reached that end of life, so to speak, from previous sessions, and they will archive them and all the video will be deleted. So that's the problem that we have in thinking about how long we want it. If it's just being used to capture lectures from a particular session, and you might argue that new lectures are required session after session for you to deliver, so it doesn't matter if they get deleted in 18 months, for example, then this question, it's still very valid, but maybe it's not important for you to use any other tool. Replay, but where it is by default in the subject site is fine. But if the answer to this question is, I've got a video recording, or I'm going to make a video recording that I want to be used again, even next session, you need to be thinking about the tool that you use for that job, and Replay is a great tool to use for it, but where it's going to live. If the answer to the third question, for example, what do you want it to look like, is I want it to be embedded in the learning materials or in the content, then again, where it sits in the default folder inside a subject for next session is going to be problematic the following session and the following session, because there will need to be manual work done to re-provision that resource and make sure that it's linked back to the right spot, and that students, etc., all have access to view that video recording. It might work for you without issue, but we get many, many jobs logged progressively each session because of this access issue, which is to do with where the video has been put, because the intention is to keep using it. So I'm not sure if any of you have had similar types of experiences to these with your resources, but basically, unless you're just going to be capturing resources for one-off use within a session, like lectures, for example, you really need to be thinking about these questions. Would anyone like to weigh in at that point about their own experiences, good, bad, etc., on the use of Replay, or maybe questions on that front? I can see Jane's put one in there for about embedding. I'll definitely get into that now. Would anyone else like to chime in? You're welcome to come off mute and chat, whatever you like. No, not so much. Okay, well,
sorry, I do have one question. Sorry. So
sure.
When they're being recorded, is there a way though to record them offline? So, for instance, onto a hard drive of your computer, and then why can't you use it that way to going forward to be able to reuse?
Yeah, look, you can absolutely record offline, as you said, and that will store it in a Panopto folder locally on your individual device. And quite a lot of people will actually back up their recordings and keep it locally for posterity, basically. But it's still going to have to be re-provisioned the next time you want to use it. I guess for me, the optimum solution is one that I'm able to store it somewhere online in the cloud that just doesn't get altered, so it can keep being linked to that location in learning materials, for example, and I don't have to do anything to keep re-provisioning it. And that's the scenario that I'd like to pursue today, is where do we store our Panopto videos so that they can just sit there and keep working for us wherever they are. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with backing up or downloading videos, etc., locally, except for the fact that you're going to have to keep provisioning them in some way. DOMS is a different prospect. That's a good question. Is it Hannah? Basically, yes, storing it in DOMS is fine as a backup, but embedding directly from DOMS into learning materials can be quite tricky. There are some complexities to doing that, and I think I'm going to propose a different option. All right, so look, let's have a look at a couple of exemplars of the content. I'm sure you're familiar with scenarios like this, but I've got a couple that I've lined up. If we have a look at a standard CSU replay folder, Panopto folder, it'll look like this, for example, that you might be familiar with the videos, with their titles. If you're the host, for example, you'll see a bunch of buttons that you can access. We'll unpack each of those. But you're also able to add new resources here or upload other videos from elsewhere. And this is becoming increasingly popular with Zoom, for example, with people making videos in the first instance in Zoom and then uploading them into replay. So probably the first and the third options are the ones that are used more often than not with this tool, to either use the Panopto recorder to make a video or to upload video from somewhere else. If we get into what Panopto videos can look like embedded, I've got an example here. We've got a YouTube video that's been embedded up here, and underneath it, we have a Panopto video embedded within a content area. And you'll see the students can either hit play to play the video. There's also a chevron underneath with the tool that allows people to make notes against it, for example, that will sit there against their own profile. They can also be emailed back to yourself if you wanted to do that. I don't know anyone that actually uses these functions. You might, but it is part of the tool set. You're able, unless the host who's created the video has turned off the ability to download, students are able to download embedded video. There's an arrow there and it'll download locally. You can also open the video full screen. And that's what we get from our embedded Panopto video. And you'll also find, if it's been made in the tool, that a disclaimer will have been added to the front of the video. I'm not sure if this has got one or not. Let's find out. It does not.
Hello again.
Okay, so when we create video in Panopto in the tool itself, we will get the CSU disclaimer, the privacy warning at the front of the video, added by default. However, that only works when we play it back in a web browser. So if I, for example, found a folder, if I find a CSU replay folder here, this is an older subject, by the way. There's only 3 in here, which makes me think perhaps the academics recorded them in something else and just uploaded it to replay, but let's just have a look quickly. Plays back in the browser when I click on it from the replay folder, and there's the disclaimer. Okay, so you get the privacy disclaimer when you play it back in your web browser.
Hi,
not when it's embedded. Okay, so it's important to know how that behaves. When you play anything back from the CSU replay folder, you get that privacy warning. Okay, here we have another embedded CSU replay video, this time in a diploma subject, pathways. You find that they've put instructions. So quite often the tool will be used for procedural information, where you want to demonstrate how to use perhaps a particular interface. So in this case, they're looking at how to use the student portal to enroll in subjects.
Hello, Pathway students. This is Sandra Fisher, and I'm your course.
Okay, so in that case, Sandra's talking the students through a particular process, and they're able to watch it obviously as many times as they like, and it's just been embedded from the CSU replay folder. That's a course site, not a subject site, so it's not going anywhere, and the video is not going anywhere. Some other examples, more embedded content. In this case, it's been provided by staff in the library, taking them through how to interpret certain text types. Now, each of the videos that we've looked at so far is intended for ongoing use. Session after session, recurring themes, perhaps recurring assessment types, resources that continue to be valid for students session after session. We haven't looked at any lectures yet, and all of them have been embedded. So it's, again, coming back to those questions. They wanted the content to be available ongoing, and they wanted it to be part of the content. If we have a look at this law subject, for example, if we scroll down, we will find that they have made, I think someone's, no, can everyone still see my screen, or has it disappeared? I'm happy to share again. Can you see the embedded video at the moment that I'm showing, or do I need to reshare?
Yes, you can see it.
Thank you. My whole screen just went black for a minute there. I thought
so did ours, but
we're okay.
It's back again.
All right. I don't know what happened there. Okay. In this case, the academic is using a content template with icons, etc. And part of that is to have concept lectures, so shorter videos embedded within the content material. This one, for example, we'll probably find only goes for, let's have a look.
Welcome to Lecture 1. This is the overview of the regulation of the legal profession.
Okay, why can't I see the timer? I'd like to know how long this goes for. 31 minutes. Okay, so I would say that as far as embedded content goes, that is really at the upper end of the spectrum, because these days, a lot of the research and anecdotal feedback that we get on length of video, ideal length of video, etc., for learning materials is that it needs to be shorter if possible. And I would suggest that 30 minutes is starting to really push those boundaries. In this case, it's a concept lecture, and the timing is there. I probably should just read the instructions first. Okay, so we've been looking again, embedded content. In this advertising subject, the academic has prepared, prior to the session starting, all of the lectures week to week. So they've got captured, narrated PowerPoint slides for the entire session, pre-recorded and sitting within the CSU replay folder. Now, I will point out, you can probably see from the dates going on here, this was from 2020, halfway through 2020. Imagine all the work that's gone into making all those videos. And then in the 30 session next year or 60 session, they all disappear. It's a significant amount of work associated with doing this. And I remember the coordinator for this particular subject, and that she was hugely organized, you know, sort of a month out from session starting. All of these weekly resources had been created. They're not embedded in the learning materials at all. She just pre-recorded each of the lectures for each week and left them in the replay folder. And again, it's fine for the session that she's running it in, but the intent was to keep using it session after session, which would mean that these would need to be reprovisioned or the folder linked back. And I can see here that we have Wendy Edwards in the room as well, one of the learning resource officers from DLT. So Wendy, if I could put you on the spot for a second, if you don't mind, can I ask, do you get a lot of jobs yourself to do with reconnecting or finding or fixing Panopto videos?
Yes, we do. Yep, that's one of our biggest pre-session requests to, as we're importing, exporting subject material, we check to see whether there are any CSU replay or Panopto videos there and ask if they want to come over. And then we usually copy them across to the next session, so then they are available for the actual session that they want.
Right. Okay, thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I know it crops up all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, we've looked at a few examples of how these videos can appear in the content and how they're organized. But really what I want to look at today is solutions. So obviously working within the tool itself, within the interface for building, and particularly I want to look at the back end of Panopto. So look, let's have a look at the tool itself through the interface. Again, feel free to pull me up on any of this as we go through. But one way of accessing the Panopto tool, a fairly standard way, is that you could be within a subject site or a course site. So if I find one, for example, find the CSU replay folder. This is just in an org site, but it's the same process. I click on the replay folder. Straight away, it tells me Panopto content. Within that interface, I've got the option to hit create, and I'm going to make a video this time around. I click on Panopto for Windows. If you've never installed the recorder before, if you try and click on Open Panopto, it's going to prompt you to download and install the file. We can now do that on our work PCs once you get the file by right-clicking on it and installing it as an administrator. Everyone's able to do that. We don't have to request access to do that anymore. Otherwise, once you've installed it, you'll be clicking on Open Panopto. And I'll just move my sharing thing out of the way. I find that there's generally, for me anyway, there's lag on how long it takes for the Panopto recorder to open. Okay, so I'm getting a message here about my webcam, and that's because I'm using it in Zoom. So maybe I'll turn it off in Zoom. And I'll try that again. This is the Panopto recorder interface. I'll make it a bit bigger. Pretty simple and straightforward. One of the things I really like about this tool is that there aren't that many options to be across. Starting at the top left, we get the important one. I can see that Warwick is in the waiting room. Okay, let him back in. Right, so we get the record button up the top. It'll change to a pause button once you hit record. The folder, the default location where it's stored will be within the site that you have launched it from. Okay, so it's important to remember if you're making a resource that you want stored somewhere else, keep in mind that when you make it, the default folder location will be where you've opened replay from. Give it a name that is going to help you identify what it's used for later on. Otherwise, it'll just put a timestamp on it. Then we start top left-hand corner, working our way down. The primary sources area is going to be your audio and your video. And I can see as I'm talking in my headset, this bar is going up and down. Great. It's capturing the audio. Video at the moment, meaning webcam. This is important. Think about what you want your end resource to look like. If you're looking for the head in the box next to shared content, you're going to need to turn the video on. So I've got my laptop's webcam and my normal webcam. Let's turn that on. There we are. So at the moment, I'm going to get a video that has my head over here and the shared content over there. Audio next to it. It's picking up my headset. Good stuff. Quality for me, you get 3 settings, standard, high, and ultra. The only difference that you really need to be aware of here with these is the size of the file that it will result in afterwards. We don't have a cap on our storage for Panopto as such. So I always put this on ultra. That means the video is going to be the highest quality, the audio will be the highest quality, and I don't really care about the file size at the end because I don't have to store it on my computer. If you're making resources, before we had a point about locally storing the file, you may want to change this to standard and the file size will be smaller. But because we're dealing with multimedia, video files, etc., it's never going to be a small file. Okay, it's going to be, you know, somewhere between 50, 60 megabytes minimum. More likely it's going to be in the hundreds, depending on how long it's going for and whether or not you've got things like webcam and things turned on. If you're capturing other media, playback from websites, etc., it's going to be a decent size file. So if that's a concern for you.
Question on that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So in terms of the video resolution for the viewer, is there going to be a significant difference between the standard and ultra?
Yeah, so your resolution can be adjusted down the bottom here. These two settings sort of work despite each other. So for me, when I record, the ultra setting is 1920 by 1080, which is high, and that alongside the amount of the frames per second being captured down the bottom here, we're starting to get, I suppose, a bit technical, but that's what I usually capture at and get very good quality video. The moment that you start reducing these, the file size will get smaller. Increasing them, it's going to get bigger. But I think as a default measure, if you want good looking video and you're working with a widescreen monitor, particularly, I'd be aiming for 1920 by 1080 as my benchmark. Okay. There's a box underneath the quality that's called Capture Computer Audio, and this is to do with sound that's coming through the machine back at you. So if you think about Zoom, for example, if at the moment, if I was just recording our meeting, I would only be getting me talking. If I want the audio that's coming from the other direction, so people participating in an online meeting, for example, you've got to have checked this box, Capture Computer Audio, and that will get both sides. Okay, so that's important. Then we get into secondary sources. Most of the time, I would really suggest that you only have one secondary source. And I'd probably suggest, until you get very comfortable with this tool, that you don't use the Capture PowerPoint option. Just capture what's going to be on your screen, on your main screen. And that way you can have open whatever you need to have open, whether it's PowerPoint, PDFs, web pages, whatever the case may be. If you just work within capturing what's on the screen, you're also able to turn on this preview, which will show you which screen is being captured. In this case, because my Panopto recorder is also on the same screen that I'm going to record, I get this box inside a box inside a box. Don't worry too much about that. All that tells me is that I'm capturing the right screen. If you're using multiple monitors, you can just drag this off to another screen, and that will be fine as well. Makes it a bit easier to monitor what it is that you're capturing. All right, so look, I'm happy with the preview, so I can turn that off. I'm going to hit record. We get a bit of a count in. Usually there's about 2 to 3 seconds delay, but if the computer's a bit slow, or you're running a lot of other different resources as well, the start of that timer can take a bit longer. So you need to probably do a test run or two to see how long before that kicks in. Usually it makes sense to wait sort of 5 seconds before you start doing your talking. We'll look at editing and things in a second, but basically the difference, one of the big differences between using Panopto and using Zoom, for example, is the fact that we can edit the recordings and the final video will stay edited, as opposed to Zoom, where you just get the ability to top and tail the cloud recording. All right, so look, it's been capturing everything that's happening on this screen. I'll just move this out of the way onto my other screen for a second. So we have a look at capturing whatever's happening on our screens. If I've happened to have some video playing in the background, etc., I can do that. And it'll also be captured as part of the recording.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. AHT 101.
All right, so the point is that you can capture motion within your video, but as soon as I've done that, I get a warning within Panopto telling me that I'm using a lot of system resources. Okay, so this comes back to that question about the quality settings again. If you're going to be doing a lot of things at once, you may want to reduce that quality from ultra to something else. I'm also running Zoom at the same time. So yes, I'm burning a lot of system resources. So look, I've finished with my recording now. I'm going to hit stop. And once it's stopped, it's going to bring up a summary of how the file's being handled. The recording is complete. I can trash it on the spot, or I can hit done. You also have the opportunity to change the title again at that point. Then we get this manager overview of what's happening with the recording. This is not particularly important, but you can use these tabs to go back and record other videos while you're waiting for this to be dealt with, because it's now got to be processed. So if I'm just going to minimize this and have a look at the subject site where I launched replay from. This is where I started it from. If I just hit F5 and refresh, we now find that sitting at the top of the list is my video, and it is processing that video. The processing goes through a few stages. First, it processes the audio track, which it calls a podcast, and it'll work through that. It's already created a thumbnail for me, and I can see from these buttons next to it that I can already start to work on the video file if I want to, including editing. So I'm going to get into the editing in just a second. Let's have a look at some of the other buttons. If I go to the settings tab for the video, move my Zoom thing out of the way, I can change the name of the file from in here after the fact as well. So far we've seen 3 different ways of changing the name if you need to. I can also change the location of where it's stored. That might be important to you later on. The preview image you can change. You can also upload your own if you wanted to. If you don't like the thumbnails that have been provided, or you've got something else you want to use, you can absolutely change that. There's the hyperlink that will be provided later on to people if you wanted to send a link directly to someone. Gives me some other information about the video, including the duration, etc. Some of those features we saw from the embedded content. Do we want people to be able to comment on them? We don't see public comments on our videos when they're embedded. Okay, so this feature is probably a little bit redundant. Once it's embedded, it only affects the person that's looking at the video at the time, whether they use that notes feature. Copyright notice is turned on by default. You can't turn that off, but it only appears when someone plays back the video in the browser. Okay. By default, people can download, but you can turn that off here from this download section. Don't worry about description. Let's get down to the bottom of this section. There's also an availability option. And by default, your videos are available from the folder immediately, and they'll stay in there available. This says forever, remembering what we were talking about with subject sites getting archived. So if the subject site's deleted, then the Panopto folder is gone. So this might say forever, but it actually depends on where the video has been stored. All right. Importantly, we also have a share folder, a share settings area as well that you need to be aware of. When we launch it within subject sites, the students are listed as viewers. They can watch the videos. They can't edit them. They can't delete them. The hosts, the instructors, the teachers in the subject site, it picks up on your login, are the ones who can edit the existing videos or create new videos. That's the default setup of CSU Replay within our subject sites. You can change your access settings for the video in this section underneath and change it to if you want everyone to be able to view the video, if you want it to be public or private, you can change those settings. If you want to provide the hyperlink to give to people, there's also a section at the bottom of the share area that you could copy and paste to people. So I could, for example, give that to you guys if you needed it. You don't have to click on that, but that's where the video lives currently. It's already live. Or if you want that video to go straight into your content area, you can go down here to the embed area and copy the embed code underneath. When we embed, you'll find that it has some default settings on how wide that embed looks in the subject area. We can copy that code, and then I could go into any content area at all. I'll go into this embedded objects area, and I'll make one. So I'm going to build a new content item. It's probably not a good area to go into. There's too much content in here. Let's go into another area. That's better. Right, so I'm making a new content item. Give it a name. I'm going to put the video in here, but I've copied embed code, which means I need to turn on the code button or the code view. And now I'm going to paste that code, Control V. There's my Panopto video embed code and hit save. I'll get a preview and you'll see that that disclaimer has been added to the start of it. All right, if I hit submit, my video is now ready to go. Okay, so that's one way of embedding content very quickly and easily within your learning items, your learning materials. The other way of doing it is I'm going to edit this and get rid of the embedding that I've just done. Okay, I've got a new content item. It's blank. You can go across to the plus sign that's over here for add content. Scroll down the tools list and find Panopto. Here it is, Panopto video. And it's going to connect. First up, by default, it will look in the folder that you've launched this from. So the subject site. and that newest recording is sitting there at the top of the list. I can select it, hit insert, and the result is exactly the same. So if you're comfortable working with embed codes or want to grab those quickly and embed it anywhere in any website, you can certainly do that. Or within i2, we can use this plus button, browse our library and insert the video directly from there. So it is very quick and easy to put Panopto videos embedded inside our subject sites. If we go back to our folder where we were looking at the settings, etc., associated, I'd also like to point out that we have the ability to also add assessment folders within Panopto. We get asked about this quite a lot. I may not be able to access it from my org site. No, I can't. So I'm going to do it from a subject site. Let's find any subject site. Here's one. If I go into the CSU replay folder, okay, I'm not going to mess with Peter's subject site. I promise I won't make any permanent changes. If we go into the folder settings, when we look inside our CSU replay folder, top right-hand corner is where we'll find our settings cog. One of the first things that you'll see in subject sites is this create assignment folder option. When we click on that, it provisions a folder with the subject name and the word assignments in brackets afterwards, and that is now available inside the subject site. If I click on that, we'll see it's up the top there. If I hover the mouse, it gives me the full name. That assignment folder, if we go into it, is quite particular in that it will allow students to create or upload video that only they and the instructor can see. No other students can view it. So it's private in that sense, and this is how this tool is used when people give multimedia tasks to students for their assessment and they need a secure location to upload or create that video. You create the assignment folder, you give that location, that instruction to students, go into there and either create using the Panopto recorder or upload video that you've made somewhere else, and it will sit inside there waiting for the instructor to view it or for the students to upload the video itself. This is not connected to any other part of i2, so you can't mark it or assess it in here somewhere and have the marks appear in the grade center. It's not integrated. It's just a secure storage location for students to use that is private. Only the instructor and the students can see those. So it is used quite a lot now for exactly that purpose, because we don't have another institutional level storage option for students to load media into. I will point out that this can be used for audio as well as video. So if you've got assessments for students that involve them making a recording, could be just the audio, could be a narrated video or screencast, whatever the case may be, all those media types can be uploaded into this assessment folder for the students, and it is completely private. So it's quite a good feature. Any questions on using assignment folders while I'm looking at this now? No, not so much. Okay, I'm happy to come back to that if people have got questions after the fact. With Panopto, if you ever have folders that you've created that you want to get rid of, you can go back into the folder settings, make sure you're looking at the right folder, but I'm in the assignments folder at the moment. So if I click on that, folder settings, it is the assignments folder, good. I can go down to the manage section and that's where I can delete the folder. So I'm going to get rid of that. Be very careful that you don't accidentally delete the whole Panopto folder. I've seen this happen recently. So you need to, be aware what folder you're actually in before you go and try and delete something. Okay, the other thing to be aware of with CSU replay folders is the ability for students to subscribe to the folder using an RSS feed. And that's over here in the top right-hand corner. So if you want students to be alerted every time you add new video content, for example, into this folder, you can get the subscription details from here, whether or not they're using iTunes or something else. Quite often people will be using something else. You might, for example, want to just get the audio feed for students to be able to get podcasts, for example, but they can certainly subscribe, and that will alert them every time you add new content to the CSU replay folder. So it's important that, that you're aware of that feature. It is available to students by default. Okay, what other functions do we get from our video that we've published? We also get statistics. If we look at the stats area, this will only work for video that's available in the replay folder in the subject site. And it will allow you, if I make this forever, how many people have viewed this video? We find that there were 24 views / downloads. There were 16 unique views. So that means that some people watched it multiple times, total number of minutes, etc. And the average number of users that actually watched it to the end. We get those stats highlighted up the top in the dashboard. We see the dates when that's happened. We keep scrolling down, you get this breakdown of engagement, which really I think is just a breakdown of when people have started and stopped the video. And then down the bottom, we actually get identified the users in the subject site that have watched or engaged with the video. So this is arguably the part that's of most value to teachers, I would suggest, is finding out who's watching what, how long they're watching it for, etc., and when they've done it. And it's quite a decent feature. You can also export that report up here in the top right-hand corner. You can get a CSV file, an Excel file with the names of who's watching what. But this will only work for video that you have living inside your CSU replay folder. So that is one pro for keeping video in there. It integrates with the subject site, with the students enrolled in that subject site, and will allow you to get that level of detail in terms of tracking. Okay, editing. Let's get into editing. Here's my recording that I'd made beforehand, test recording for PD, the buttons when I hover my mouse. Third one along is edit. If I click on that, it will open the recording inside my web browser. And what we see is a preview up here of the video, what it looks like. I can play it back if I need to. Down here underneath, if I move my Zoom menu out of the way, is a continuum that will show me the audio track. There's the squiggles underneath. The video, I'll just show previews of the video that's at those different points in time. And most importantly, this pair of scissors. With Panopto, we have the ability to click at any point within the continuum and left click and drag to highlight sections that we want to cut. So if I don't like this section, I can left click and drag that black area. If I now clicked apply up the top, it would be cut from the recording. If I want to do it in multiple locations, there, start to finish there, I can make as many of those crops or cuts as I like. And if I hit apply, they will not be part of the recording, the final recording available. If you have made a mistake with this process, all is not lost. You can come back to that video, go into your editor and hit revert, and it will restore the original Panopto recording. Okay, so you can absolutely restore your original one if you've got a bit overzealous with your cutting and cropping, etc. There is always a way back at that point.
So Lachlan, you can revert while you're in this mode right now.
Absolutely.
But if you saved it, that's it, goodbye, or?
No, if you save it, so hitting apply is the same as save, you can open it again and still hit revert. It'll revert it back to the original video file itself. So It still keeps a copy of that right in the background.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the original lives behind, I suppose, the live version. But what you could do, it's a really good question, Jen, you could download your original one and keep a local version if you wanted to make sure absolutely that you had that original file just in case. But yeah, the cloud-based version keeps the original behind. It sits behind this revert button, if you will. And the otherwise, it's what's downloadable by the students is your most current cropped edited version after you hit apply. You can, it's a good question, Nicola, you can use, there is an undo button up the top here, which will remove the last change that you made in that sitting. So as long as you're still inside the editor at the same time, hit undo and it'll remove that last cut. But if I close this and reopen it again, it's not going to give me the option to undo. It's only going to refer to the last changes that I made at the same sitting, if that makes sense. Yeah. Good questions. You can zoom in on the editor if you like, if you want to get a closer look at the continuum. This usually applies to people wanting to look at what they're saying at particular points in time. So if this is not enough kind of detail for me to get in there and go, or you're running a lot of other different resources as well, the start of that timer, not enough, I need to get in closer. So you can keep zooming in and get in pretty close at that point in time to find out where you need to crop and cut, etc. Okay, I don't use the normalize function, but I do get asked about this sometimes. It refers usually to people that you might get someone speaking in one of these, for example, that has a very loud projection voice or very soft, for example. Normalize will actually bring it to a benchmark level. Maybe if you've also got different media playing at times that either again is too loud or too soft in the recording when you're listening to it, you can hit normalize and it will bring it all in line so that it has a standard level of playback. It's not a bad function to at the click of a button if you're worried about volume levels. Usually this crops up if we've got someone that's very softly spoken, for example, and they want their recordings to be louder. You've got two options. You can tell the students, turn your volume up, or we could use something like the normalize feature. Okay, a few other interesting features in our editor. By default, there is no chapters as such. If you think of a CD with different tracks, those are not on in your recording, but you can turn them on. You can use this option called Smart Chapters, where it will try and identify where you've stopped and started for people to be able to jump to different sections. And the way it does that is not based on the audio, but on what's being showed on the screen. So if you've got PowerPoint slides and you've changed from one slide to another, if you turn on the Smart Chapters feature, it will automatically create a different track each time you transition to a different screen. So that's not a bad feature to have if you've watched videos where people have got different sections identifying different content. You can actually introduce the Smart Chapters feature and have a look at how that might work for your video. It will just allow watchers to jump to different points in the recording based on what you were showing on your slides. Okay, hang on, Jen, let me have a look at this because some of us are vain or there's a need to hide background. Are there any filters? Okay. Not easily. I would suggest if that's a problem, maybe record in Zoom and upload it into Panopto. At that point, you can use the Panopto editor and you won't have to worry about your background. It's a little bit more handling involved, but if you're worried particularly about what's behind you in the recording, for example, maybe make it in Zoom, download that video, and then you can upload it into your replay folder and use the editor. More handling, but it will allow you a bit more control. Because remembering, you can't really edit in Zoom. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons that people might come across to using this tool. Look, I'm aware of time getting away from us, and I really want to show you the back end. It's very important. So I will really gloss over this, the next piece, which is that there are a couple of other options that you might want to pursue with Panopto, particularly the option to use the quizzes. If you want to add multiple choice or different question types in the middle of your videos in Panopto, you absolutely can. Open the editor, go into the quiz section, click on add a quiz, and it's going to, by default, you can see it's decided at 14 seconds I'm going to add this quiz, but you can change where it happens. I can choose between multiple choice, fill in the blanks, true or false, for example. You put your question type in there, and what it's going to do is stop the video at that point and prompt the watcher to respond to the questions, and you can determine whether or not it will allow them to continue watching if they've got it right or not, or just keep progressing. I don't know many people that use the Panopto quizzes effectively. It's a bit of a novelty and requires a bit of work, obviously, to get it to work properly. But I think there's some potential there for those of you that want to have a play around with adding in quizzes in the middle of your videos. Again, this would want to be a resource that you want to keep using ongoing. But you can make a number of those within your video presentation. I think 10 is the limit for each video, but you can add quizzes in and determine where you want them to happen within the video and make it more of a learning object rather than just a sort of a passive viewing experience. All right, I want to get into the back end of Panopto. When we talk about the back end, we're talking about a particular website address, and I will drop that into the chat. Absolutely, Jane. That's the address for where CSU's Panopto videos all live. And by default, a lot of us don't know about it, but it's important that you get used to going into that location, because you and every other user in there has your own private folder in Panopto that you can use. This is what it looks like. The location of where these videos are stored has just recently changed in line with some of our own internal requirements for where our video is housed. So it's in a secure location now, or a secure country, I should say. But when you go into the back end of Panopto, you'll see that you have access to the recorder still, so you can launch that and make videos there, or you can upload other media. I want to point you towards My Folder, the My Folder option. The reason that this is important is because any video you create in the back end is not subject to any purge. It's not connected to any subject site. It just sits there until you link to it or point to it from somewhere else. So if you have videos in here that you've created for particular subjects or for particular purposes, they will not get deleted. Now, it's a very good point. If you leave CSU, firstly, I'd be saying download it so you've got a local copy, absolutely. But it's not going to get deleted whilst you're working at CSU, probably is the point that I would make. I'm not sure about access to this resource. It requires a CSU login to get into the back end. So that probably answers that question. If you don't have a working CSU login, you're not going to be able to access the back end. The files will still be there, but you might not be able to log into them. So if that's going to be the case, yeah, the videos will still work. Absolutely. That's a really good question. Even after you go, those videos will still work within subject sites, will still be visible and accessible. So that's a very good question. They don't get deleted the way that subject sites do. They don't get archived. They don't get purged. They will sit in here. So this is a very good option for housing video, audio, etc., that needs to be accessible session after session after session. So another term that you might use for folders or videos that go into the back end would be perhaps a master folder for a subject. So we can see here that I've got some subject folders here. You can add more. There's an add folder option just here. Permanent folder for subject X. Okay, and the videos that sit inside here will just keep being available. This is really important if you've got videos that you want to keep using either for assessment or learning materials, session after session after session, and you can access those. Learning resource officers and other staff will be able to access those from the back end without having to go hunting for which particular session, which cohort had those videos, are the privacy settings or who has access to them right. All of those things become less of a problem or no problem at all if you're storing those types of videos in the back end. They could absolutely make their recordings in here, Karen, in their own My folder in the back of Panopto. That's a great question. Library staff could access these. They'd also be able to have, well, they can be linked to and embedded to from anywhere, absolutely. And there can be common ones as well. They don't have to be private individual ones. Yeah, I know I've glossed over that, but the back end of Panopto is a very important option for video that you're going to use ongoing. Right, so look, I'm aware that we are just about to hit time. And as always, I haven't quite hit that mark in terms of content, but I'm happy to hang around for a bit and chat to people if you've got particular questions. I'll turn my video back on again. And I'll stop the recording in just a moment. But if you do have particular questions around Panopto, there's quite a few people at the university that have a lot of knowledge around how to use this tool. So do reach out if you want to chat to me or to Di Plunkett in DIT or the Learning Resource Officers in DLT. This is a supported institutional licensed tool, and it is a very good option for storing and creating video that you intend to use either permanently or ongoing session after session. So absolutely, we're happy to help with your use of that tool. All right, look, I'm going to stop the video and then I'll get into individual questions, etc. Stop the recording, Lachlan.